The dimly lit bar smelled of cheap alcohol, sweat, and roasted suya. The wooden benches were rough, the plastic tables stained with years of careless drinking. A rusty fan hummed weakly in the corner, barely stirring the thick, humid air. It was a place where men came to escape their troubles, drown their sorrows, and pretend, even if for a few hours, that life was not as cruel as it seemed. Olu sat at the far end of the bar, his back against the cracked wall, a half-empty bottle of beer in front of him. His shirt was loose and wrinkled, his trousers slightly torn at the edges, but none of it mattered to him. He laughed loudly, the alcohol making his voice rough and careless. Beside him, 3 of his friends, Bayo, Tund, and Felix, shared in his drunken excitement. Their words slurred as they argued over football and politics. "Let me tell you," Bayo said, slamming his beer bottle on the table. "Manchester United will never win anything again. Their defense is finished." "Shut up," Bayo, Tund retorted. "You said the same thing last season, and look where we are now." Olu chuckled, shaking his head. "You people are arguing over football, but see me, I am enjoying life." He pulled a slim young lady onto his lap, her tight red dress barely covering her thighs. She giggled, running her fingers over his chest as she pouted. "Olu, you promised me something today," she whispered into his ear, her breath smelling of sweet wine. Felix leaned forward, grinning. "Ah, Olu, is it not your wife's money you are using?" Olu waved a dismissive hand. "Forget that woman. A man must enjoy himself. What is the use of money if you cannot spend it?" With a dramatic gesture, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a few crumpled naira notes. His last. The money had been stolen that morning from the purse of his hardworking wife, Ada. He had taken it while she was in the kitchen, humming a gospel song as she prepared his breakfast. The young lady on his lap snatched the money eagerly, her eyes lighting up. "You are too sweet, Olu," she purred, pressing a kiss on his cheek. His friends roared with laughter. "Olu, Olu, the great spender," Bayo teased. "When you get home, better prepare for war." Olu only grinned, already lost in the soft scent of the woman in his arms. He downed the last of his beer and staggered to his feet. "Come, let's go somewhere quiet," he murmured to the girl. She took his hand, leading him behind the bar, past empty crates and rusting metal drums. The night air was cool, but the warmth between them grew quickly. Olu pressed her against the wall, his lips crashing into hers with the desperation of a man who had nothing to lose. Her hands roamed his back as he whispered sweet lies into her ear, promises he never intended to keep. The minutes passed in a blur, their stolen moment fueled by alcohol and recklessness. When they finally pulled apart, she laughed, fixing her dress. "Olu, you owe me more than this," she teased. He smirked, breathless. "Next time, my dear, next time." Then, with unsteady steps, he stumbled away, weaving through the dark alley until he reached the main road. The journey home felt longer than usual, the alcohol making his feet heavy. By the time he reached the front door of his small, run-down apartment, his head was pounding. He pushed the door open, stepping inside as quietly as possible. The dim glow of a kerosene lamp revealed his wife, Ada, sitting on the edge of their bed. She was still in her work clothes, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes, filled with exhaustion and silent rage, met his unsteadily. "Olu," she said in a quiet voice, one that carried more weight than any slap. "Where have you been?" Olu cleared his throat, swaying slightly. "Just out with the boys," he mumbled. Ada's eyes flickered to his wrinkled shirt, the faint lipstick stain near his collar, the stench of alcohol on his breath. She took a slow, deep breath. "Did you take the money from my purse?" Olu scoffed, waving a hand. "What kind of question is that? Why would I?" "Don't lie to me," she interrupted, her voice sharp now. "I know how much I had this morning, and now it is gone." He frowned, pretending to be offended. "So you are accusing me? Your husband?" Ada stood up. "Olu, I work from morning till night just to make sure we have food. And you," her voice wavered as she shook her head. "You sit in bars, wasting the little we have on women and beer." How much longer do you think this can continue? Olu looked away, avoiding her gaze. His heart pounded, not from guilt, but from the fear of being caught in his lies. Ada, you are always complaining, he muttered. A man needs his freedom. Freedom? She echoed bitterly. Olu, do you know what freedom means? It means not being a slave to your own selfishness. It means being responsible for your family. He scoffed, pushing past her toward the bed. I am too tired for this. Ada stared at him, her hands trembling. This was not the man she had married. That man had been poor but ambitious, struggling but loving. Now, all she saw was a shell of that man, one who had traded his dignity for fleeting pleasures. As he collapsed onto the bed, already half asleep, Ada sat back down, staring at the flickering flame of the lamp. Something inside her hardened. She would not live like this forever. Olu had no idea, but his days of comfort were running out. The darkness outside was still thick when Ada's eyes fluttered open. The world was quiet, save for the occasional hoot of an owl and the distant barking of stray dogs. She lay still for a moment, staring at the cracked ceiling, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle deep in her bones. Beside her, Olu snored loudly, his mouth open, his breath heavy with the stale scent of alcohol. Every few minutes, he let out a loud fart, the stench mixing with the musty air of their small bedroom. Ada clenched her jaw and sighed. Carefully, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood, wincing as the cold cement floor met her bare feet. She tied her wrapper tightly around her waist and made her way to the small kitchen in the corner of their one-room apartment. The space was cramped, a single kerosene stove sitting atop a wooden table cluttered with plates and cooking utensils. She reached for the bag of flour she had bought the day before, bought with her own money as always. Ada ran a hand over her face, pushing back the fatigue, and got to work. For the next hour, she mixed, kneaded, and shaped the dough, her hands moving with practiced ease. The rhythmic sounds of her work filled the silence. The slap of dough against the wooden board, the scrape of a spoon against a bowl, the occasional crackle of the fire. All the while, Olu slept, oblivious. When the loaves were finally in the small local oven, she wiped her hands on a cloth and moved to prepare breakfast. She had bought a few eggs, tomatoes, and onions the day before, and she quickly set about making a simple meal of bread and fried eggs. By the time the sun's first light crept through the window, Ada was done. She packed some food into a small plastic container, leaving it on the table for Olu, though she doubted he would appreciate it. Then, she tied her scarf, picked up her basket of freshly baked bread, and stepped outside. The streets were still waking up as she walked towards the market. The air was cool, the scent of damp earth and morning dew filling her lungs. The city, though rough and unkind, was beautiful in these early hours, before the chaos of the day took over. As she walked, her thoughts drifted to the past, to the lies that had shaped her life. She had met Olu when he was still pretending to be a hardworking carpenter. He had charmed her with sweet words, promising her a future where they would build a life together, side by side. He spoke of his dreams, of how he wanted to own a furniture shop, of how he just needed a little support. She had believed him, but after their marriage, reality had unfolded like a cruel joke. The workshop he claimed to have did not exist. The few tools he owned were borrowed. When she confronted him, he faked sorrow, told her he had been fired unfairly, and was now struggling to find another job. Ada, driven by love and duty, took on the responsibility. She started baking and selling bread to support them, thinking it was temporary. But as time passed, Olu made no effort to find work. He became comfortable depending on her earnings, pretending to search for opportunities while wasting time with friends. Whenever she mentioned the need for him to find work, he would either ignore her or snap, accusing her of not respecting him as the man of the house. A bitter smile played on her lips as she walked. Man of the house. What kind of man sits at home, living off his wife's sweat, only to take her money and spend it on alcohol and women? She shook her head, pushing the thoughts away. She had a business to run and a future to secure with or without Olu. Olu sat in the same dingy bar where he spent most of his afternoons, his fingers tapping lazily against a half-empty beer bottle. The stale scent of sweat, alcohol, and grilled suya lingered in the air. His friends were not around today, but he didn't mind. He had more important things occupying his mind. A smile played on his lips as he watched the young woman across the table. She was different from Ada. Young, playful, and full of admiration for him. Her name was Cynthia, a slender girl with smooth dark skin and a laugh that made men turn their heads. She was not particularly rich, but she had a way of making him feel like a king. "Olu, you're staring," Cynthia teased, biting her lower lip playfully. "What are you thinking about?" He leaned back, smirking. "Just thinking about how lucky I am to have found a sweet girl like you." She giggled, twirling a strand of her long braids. "You always know what to say." Olu took a deep sip of his beer and exhaled contentedly. Cynthia had been the best thing to happen to him in a long time. Unlike Ada, who always nagged about money and responsibilities, Cynthia never asked difficult questions. She just wanted to be spoiled, and Olu, despite his empty pockets, was determined to give her everything. The problem was that he had no money of his own. At first, he tried sneaking more cash from Ada's purse when she wasn't looking, but she had become more careful after the last incident. So he found another way: credit. He started small, taking drinks and suya on credit from the bar, promising to pay tomorrow. But tomorrow never came. He borrowed money from neighbors, claiming he was expecting payment from a big carpentry job. He even took food items from the local market women, assuring them his wife would settle the bill later. And the biggest mistake of all, he started taking things on credit from Ada's own suppliers. Ada was known in the market as a hardworking woman. She bought her baking ingredients from the same traders every week, always paying promptly. So when Olu walked into the market one afternoon, claiming to be her husband and requesting flour and sugar on credit, the shopkeepers trusted him. "She will pay when she comes," he said confidently, his charming smile doing most of the work. "You know my wife, she never fails." The shopkeepers hesitated but eventually gave him what he asked for. After all, Ada was a good woman. She wouldn't let a small debt ruin her reputation. Olu used the flour not for baking, but to impress Cynthia. He arranged for her to come over to his house when Ada was at the market and cooked for her with ingredients he hadn't bought. "This is delicious," Cynthia said, licking her fingers as she ate. Olu chuckled. "Anything for you, my queen." She leaned in closer, her fingers tracing circles on his arm. "I really need a new dress, Olu. Something nice for Sunday service." He hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Consider it done." The next morning, he strolled into the local boutique and picked out a bright yellow gown. When the shop owner asked for payment, he gave the same line. "My wife will pay when she comes." For weeks, he continued like this, living a fantasy life with Cynthia, taking goods and services without a single naira in his pocket. It was all going smoothly until the news reached Ada. One evening, as Ada was arranging her stall at the market, one of her suppliers, Mama Ibeg, approached her with a frown. "Ada, my daughter," she began, folding her arms. "When are you paying for the last sack of flour?" Ada looked up, confused. "Flour? I paid for the last one, Mama."
Mama Ibeg's froven depenet.
"No, not that one. The one your husband collected." Ada's hands froze mid-air. "My husband?" "Yes, Olu," Mama Ibeg confirmed. "He came here 2 weeks ago and took a full sack of flour on credit. He said you would pay later. I didn't want to disturb you, but I can't let it go any longer." Ada felt her heart sink. A cold wave of anger and humiliation washed over her. "Mama, are you sure?" "Very sure. And am not the only one," the woman said. "Go and ask Mama Chitty, the oil seller. He collected from her too." Ada felt like the ground had been pulled from under her feet. How many people had he deceived in her name? She clenched her fists, her mind racing. This time, Olu had gone too far, and he was going to face the consequences.
Ada stormed into their small, dimly lit home, her heart pounding in her chest. Olu was sprawled lazily on the bed, his shirt unbuttoned, one leg hanging off the side as he flipped through an old newspaper. The room reeked of alcohol, sweat, and irresponsibility. He barely glanced up when she entered. "You're back early," he muttered. Ada dropped her basket of unsold bread onto the table with a loud thud, making him flinch. "Olu," she said, her voice dangerously calm. He sighed dramatically. "What is it now, woman?" She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the anger boiling inside her refused to be contained. "How dare you?" she snapped. "How dare you go around the market taking things on credit in my name? Do you think I don't have enough burdens already?" Olu's eyes narrowed, and he slowly sat up. "What are you talking about? Don't pretend you don't know," she shouted. "Mama Ibg told me everything. The flour, the oil, the sugar, even the dress you bought for that harlot you've been parading around town." Olu scoffed and leaned back against the wall, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Ah, so that's what's making you shout like a madwoman?" He crossed his arms. "I am your husband, Ada. If I take something, it is ours. You should be happy I even took anything for myself after all the stress you put me through." Ada's mouth fell open in disbelief. "Stress? You are the one who refuses to work. You steal my money, you waste my earnings, and now you are dragging my name through the mud in the market." Olu's smirk disappeared, and his expression darkened. He stood up, towering over her, his voice dangerously low. "Watch how you speak to me, woman." "Or what?" Ada challenged, standing her ground. "You'll hit me? You'll take more of my money and go drink with your useless friends? You'll run back to that little girl who—" Smack! The slap came fast and sharp, sending a stinging heat across her cheek. Ada stumbled back, her hand flying to her face as tears welled up in her eyes. Olu pointed a finger at her. "You are lucky I am still in this house with you. I can leave any time, and you will regret ever speaking to me like this." Ada stared at him, breathless. "Then leave," she whispered. He laughed coldly. "Be careful what you wish for." With that, he grabbed his shirt and walked out of the house, slamming the door behind him. A week later, Ada spent the next few days trying to clean up the mess Olu had created. She went around the market, apologizing to the traders, promising to pay back the debts, even though it meant working extra hours. She refused to let him destroy everything she had built. But then something strange happened. One evening, as she was closing up her stall, her landlord, Baba Ease, approached her. "Ada, my daughter," he said gently. "I didn't see you at the meeting yesterday. Have you finished moving your things?" Ada frowned. "Moving? What do you mean?" Baba Ease looked at her with confusion. "Your husband came last week and settled everything. He sold the house. The new owner will be moving in soon." Ada felt the air leave her lungs. "Sold?" "Yes, he said you both agreed to relocate, and since the house was in his name, the payment was sent to him directly." Her head spun. Olu had sold their home. The realization hit her like a brick. He had planned this. The threats, the debts, the argument, it was all leading up to this moment. He never intended to stay.
With shaking hands, she turned and ran. When she reached the house, the door was wide open, and the inside was nearly empty. The bed was gone. The old wardrobe was missing. The few valuables she had left, her savings, her wedding jewelry, had all disappeared. Olu was gone. Tears blurred her vision as she collapsed onto the bare floor, her breath coming in sharp, painful gasps. Her husband, the man she had sacrificed everything for, had stolen the last thing she had left, her home, and he had run away with his mistress. Olu whistled a happy tune as he walked beside Cynthia on the lonely dirt road leading to the next village. The weight of the bag slung over his shoulder, the one filled with cash from selling the house, made him feel invincible. He was finally free from Ada and her nagging. Cynthia, dressed in a tight red dress and sandals, clung to his arm, giggling. "Baby, I still can't believe we did it. We're rich." Olu chuckled, squeezing her waist. "Of course, my love. With this money, we'll start fresh. Maybe even move to the city. No more struggling." The sun had long disappeared behind the trees, and the moon cast eerie shadows along the dusty path. The road was deserted, except for the chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle in the bushes. "We should reach the next village by morning," Olu said. "Once we get there, we'll find a nice place to stay and—" Suddenly, Cynthia stopped walking. "Olu," she whispered, her grip tightening on his arm. "Did you hear that?" He frowned. glancing around. The wind howled through the trees, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Hear what? Before she could answer, 3 men stepped out from the bushes, their faces partially hidden behind cloth masks. One of them held a long knife, the moonlight glinting off its sharp edge. Another carried a thick wooden club. "Where do you think you're going so late at night?" the tallest of them asked, his voice deep and menacing. Olu's heart pounded. He tightened his grip on the bag. "We don't want any trouble, my brothers. We're just passing through." The man with the knife chuckled. "Trouble? No, we only want a small contribution." He nodded at Olu's bag. "Hand it over." Olu's grip on the bag tightened. "This is my money. I worked hard for it." The man with the club laughed. "Worked hard? Or stole it from your wife?" Olu's blood turned cold. What? Cynthia suddenly let go of his arm and stepped away. She folded her arms, her playful expression replaced with something darker. "I told you he wouldn't give it up easily," she said to the robbers. Olu's stomach dropped. "Cynthia?" She smirked. "Oh, baby, you really thought I was running away with you forever?" The tallest robber chuckled. "Your little girlfriend here told us all about you, how you sold your wife's house and ran off like a coward. She made a deal with us." Olu turned to Cynthia, his face twisting in shock. "You set me up?" Cynthia sighed dramatically. "Oh, don't look so hurt. Did you think I was going to waste my life with a lying, jobless man like you? Please." Rage and betrayal boiled inside Olu. But before he could react, the man with the club swung it hard against his stomach. Wham! Olu doubled over, gasping for air. Another blow landed on his back, sending him crashing to the ground. He groaned, spitting dust from his mouth. "Please," he gasped, reaching for Cynthia. "Don't do this." She only laughed as she reached down and yanked the bag from his weak grasp. "Goodbye, Olu," she said sweetly. The robbers rained more kicks and punches on him before vanishing into the darkness with his money. By the time the pain and dizziness cleared, Olu was left lying in the middle of the road, his body bruised, his clothes torn, and his future completely destroyed. By morning, Olu had no choice but to drag himself into the next village. His stomach growled with hunger, and his lips were cracked from thirst. He had no money, no home, and no strength to go back to Ada. For days, he wandered the streets like a ghost, begging for food. Some people pitied him and tossed him scraps, while others chased him away like a stray dog. The once proud man who had laughed with his friends in bars and lavished stolen money on a mistress was now just another beggar on the street. Forgotten, humiliated, and utterly alone. Ada sat on the cold, empty floor of what used to be her home, staring at the bare walls. Everything was gone, her furniture, her clothes, even her cooking pots. The memories of the life she had built with Olu played in her mind like a cruel joke. She had sacrificed everything for him, only for him to sell their house and run away with another woman. A lump formed in her throat, but she refused to cry. She had wasted enough tears on that man. The sound of soft knocking on her door snapped her out of her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Mama Ibeg and 2 other women from the market standing outside, concern etched on their faces. "Ada, my daughter," Mama Ibeg said gently, stepping inside. "We heard what happened." Ada nodded weakly. "He took everything." The women exchanged glances before one of them, Nkechi, spoke up. "We won't let you suffer alone. You are one of us." Before Ada could protest, they started unpacking the baskets they had brought. Gary, beans, palm oil, and even a few cooking utensils. Mama Ibeg placed a comforting hand on Ada's shoulder. "You are a strong woman, Ada. Don't let that useless man destroy you." Tears welled in Ada's eyes, but this time, they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of gratitude. With the support of her neighbors and friends, Ada wasted no time getting back on her feet. The next morning, she went to the market and resumed her bread business. Though she had lost her home, she had not lost her skill, her determination, or the respect of her customers. First, it was difficult. She had to borrow flour and sugar on credit, promising to pay back once she made sales. She worked harder than ever, waking up before dawn, kneading dough with tired arms and baking under the scorching heat. Her loyal customers, knowing her struggles, bought from her generously. Some even paid more than the usual price, urging her to keep going. "Ada, your bread is the best in this village," one customer said with a smile. "Olu may have taken your house, but he didn't take your talent." Encouraged by their support, Ada pushed forward. With the money she saved, she rented a small one-room house at the outskirts of the village. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Unlike before, she no longer had to worry about a lazy husband eating her hard-earned money or sneaking out at night to chase after women. For the first time in years, Ada felt a sense of peace. She still carried the scars of Olu's betrayal, but as she sat outside her new home one evening, watching the sun set behind the trees, she realized something. She was free. And freedom, no matter how painful the journey, was worth more than anything Olu had ever given her. Olu sat on a dusty street corner, his back against the wall of an old shop. His clothes were tattered, his feet covered in dust, and his once proud face was now thin and hollow. Flies buzzed around him as he stretched out his trembling hands to passing villagers. "Please, brother, just small food, anything," he murmured to a man carrying a basket of yams. The man barely spared him a glance before walking past. Olu groaned and leaned his head against the wall, his stomach twisting in painful hunger. It had been 3 days since he last ate a proper meal, and his body was beginning to give up on him. How did it come to this? Only weeks ago he had money, a house, and a woman in his arms. He had felt powerful, untouchable. But Cynthia had betrayed him. The robbers had stolen everything. And now here he was, a beggar, rejected and forgotten. One afternoon, as he sat by the village well, watching people fetch water, he overheard a group of women gossiping. "Ada is truly a strong woman," one said. "Imagine, after everything that useless husband did to her, she still stood up on her own and is doing well. God will continue to bless her," another added. "She has even moved into a new house. If it were another woman, she would have given up." Olu's chest tightened. Ada had moved on? He thought she would have been broken without him. He had expected her to struggle, to cry for him to come back. But instead, she was thriving. A bitter laugh escaped his lips. "She didn't need me after all." He remembered the nights he had sneaked out to drink with his friends, the times he had spent money on other women while Ada toiled at the bakery. He had taken her kindness for weakness. Now, as he sat on the ground with nothing but a torn shirt and an empty stomach, he finally understood. Ada had always been the strong one. He was the weak one. That evening, driven by desperation, Olu stood up and began the long walk back to Ada's new home. His legs wobbled as he made his way through the village outskirts, every step filled with shame. When he finally reached the small house, he hesitated. Would she even listen to him? Would she take him back? Swallowing his pride, he raised his hand and knocked softly on the door. A few moments later, the door opened, and there stood Ada, her face calm, her eyes unreadable. For the first time in his life, Olu had no words. Ada wiped her hands on her wrapper as she stood in the small kitchen, clearing up after dinner. It had been a long day at the market, but a fulfilling one. Her business was growing, and she no longer had to struggle to afford her needs. A gentle knock on the door made her pause. It was late. Who could it be? She wiped her hands again and walked to the door, opening it just slightly. Standing before her was a man, thin, dirty, and barely standing upright. His clothes were in rags, his skin was covered in dust, and his face was hidden beneath an overgrown beard. His hands trembled as he stretched them out toward her. "Please, madam," he mumbled, his voice weak. "Just a little food. Anything you can spare." Ada's heart softened. She had seen beggars before, but something about this man touched her. His shoulders sagged as though he carried the weight of 100 regrets. Without a second thought, she turned back inside, grabbed some leftover food wrapped in banana leaves, and fetched a small handful of coins from her basket. When she returned, she placed them gently into his outstretched hands. "Here," she said kindly. "May God help you." The man's fingers tightened around the food, But then, with a deep, shaky breath, he whispered, Ada. Ada froze. The voice. It was familiar. She took a closer look at the man's face, her heart pounding. Beneath the dirt, the sunken cheeks, and the hollow eyes, she recognized him. Olu. Her breath caught in her throat. The last time she had seen him, he was a proud man, laughing and spending money that wasn't his. Now, he stood before her like a ghost of his former self. Olu? She whispered, barely believing it. He nodded slowly, tears welling up in his dull, tired eyes. It's me, Ada. Ada's fingers curled into fists as emotions rushed through her. Anger, pity, shock. She had imagined this moment so many times, but now that he was standing before her, so weak and helpless, all the words she had planned seemed meaningless. Olu fell to his knees. Ada, I'm sorry, he choked out. I was a fool. I took everything from you and threw it away. I deserve this suffering. But I came back, because I have nowhere else to go. Ada swallowed hard. She had spent so many nights crying over this man, wishing he would realize his mistakes. And now, here he was, broken, humiliated, and begging at her door. But the pain he caused her had long since healed. She sighed and bent down slightly. Olu, I forgive you. He lifted his head, his eyes filled with hope. But, she continued firmly, forgiveness doesn't mean you can walk back into my life. Olu's face crumbled. I have moved on, she said, standing tall. I struggled, I rebuilt my life, and I am happy now. I don't hate you, Olu, but you are no longer welcome here. His lips trembled as tears slid down his cheeks. Please, Ada, I have nowhere to go. Ada looked at him one last time, her heart heavy but resolute. Then, she stepped back into the house and gently closed the door. Olu sat there on the ground, staring at the closed door, realizing for the first time that he had truly lost everything. Years had passed since Ada last saw Olu, and her life had taken a beautiful turn. Her bakery had grown beyond her imagination, and she now owned the largest bread-making business in the entire village. With hard work and determination, she expanded her trade, hiring workers and even supplying bread to nearby towns. The small, struggling woman who had once wept over a cheating husband was now a proud, independent businesswoman. One fateful market day, while overseeing her workers, Ada noticed a group of men stepping out of a luxurious black car. The villagers whispered in excitement. One of them was Chief Nwosu, a respected and wealthy widower known for his generosity and wisdom. She had heard of him before but never met him in person. As he walked through the market, Chief Nwosu's eyes landed on Ada. A warm smile spread across his face as he approached her stall. You must be the famous Ada, the woman whose bread is loved by all, he said in a deep, rich voice. Ada blushed slightly. Yes, Chief, I am Ada. I've heard so much about you, he said, picking up a loaf and inspecting it with admiration. A woman who built herself from nothing. That is rare. Ada laughed. It wasn't easy, but I had to survive. Chief Nwosu nodded approvingly. Not just survive, my dear, you thrived. From that day on, Chief Nwosu became a regular visitor to Ada's bakery. At first, he only came for bread, but soon, their conversations grew longer, filled with laughter and deep discussions about life. He admired her intelligence, her strength, and her kindness. And for the first time in a long time, Ada felt what it meant to be truly cherished. He encouraged her to dream bigger, offering financial support to help her expand her business beyond the village. With his help, Ada opened a bakery in the nearby town, employing even more people and securing a stable future for herself. But it wasn't just business. Chief Nwosu treated her with a respect and affection she had never known. He listened to her, valued her opinions, and made her feel like the most important woman in the world. One evening, as they walked by the riverside, he took her hands in his. Ada, he said softly, I have lived long enough to know that a woman like you is a rare gift. You have faced storms and risen above them. You deserve happiness, and I want to be the man who gives it to you. Tears welled up in Ada's eyes. She had spent years believing that love was only a source of pain. But now, Looking at this man who saw her worth, she realized that love, when given by the right person, could be beautiful. With a smile, she squeezed his hands. "I would be honored, Chief." Ada and Chief Nwosu became the most admired couple in the village. He adored her in every possible way, supporting her dreams, showering her with love, and treating her with the respect she had always deserved. She no longer remembered the pain of her past because she was too busy living the happiness of her present. And as she sat in her beautiful home, watching her workers load fresh bread into carts for delivery, she smiled, grateful for the journey that led her to a life she never thought possible. She had lost everything once, but in the end, she gained something far greater. A love that was true, a life that was hers, and a happiness that no one could ever take away. The end.